Hi everybody, welcome back to Living Traditions Homestead. Well, today is the end of week 2 of the Every Bit Counts challenge. Now this challenge is hosted by and was created by Jessica from Three Rivers Homestead, and it is a challenge where every day in the month of August we preserve something, anything, no matter how big or how small. The challenge really encourages us to make the most of our harvests and put as much up for the future, for the winter, as we can during the month of August. This week, I got a lot done, just like last week. Let's get started and see every day, day by day. On day 5 of the challenge, I decided to tackle this giant stevia plant that I've been growing since the spring. I use stevia a lot, stevia drops, mostly in my coffee, but we also use it in our yogurt and some other things that we want to sweeten up. I would surely like to be able to figure out how to make my own stevia drops, and I'm going to try that this year. So I'm going to be starting that project using freeze-dried stevia leaves. And so these are going to come into the house with me, and we're going to put them in the freeze dryer. You can see it produced quite a big bundle of stevia, and we're just going to start off by getting our trays ready. And I'm going to be picking off all of these stevia leaves and putting them on these trays. All 4 trays are completely filled up with stevia. I am shocked. Originally, I was going to pick some other herbs to go in the freeze dryer also, but I'm so glad that I didn't, and I cannot believe how much stevia is going to go into the freeze dryer. I'm also excited to start a project where I make my own stevia drops, because I go through a lot of them and I've been buying them all along, but it would be great if I could make them myself. So into the freeze dryer, and these should be done in just about 24 hours. Day 6 of the challenge is actually a Sunday, which is a busy and kind of long day for us with church, and we have a family dinner every Sunday. So by this time it was actually pretty late in the evening and I was pretty tired. So I decided to steam some okra from the garden, and I am going to prepare it to go into the freeze dryer. So steam blanching is what I'm doing here. I put that from the steam into the cold water to cool off. Just mixing around the water so that the cold water gets around to all of those hot okra. Once they're cool and I have them dried off a little bit, I just put them on a platter, just side by side. And then I'm gonna stick them in the freezer to kind of flash freeze before I put them in freezer bag. On day 7, I was able to get a few things done. I started by taking the dry seeds out of these contender beans that we let dry in the greenhouse on the plant. And we are saving these so that we can use them for planting for next year. On that same day, I started a small batch of chicken broth in my crock pot. I used the leftover bones and skin and kind of the carcass of a whole chicken that we had eaten for dinner a couple days ago. I put in some onion tops and some celery and also some black peppercorns and some spices, and it will sit and cook in here for about 24 hours. That day also, all 4 of these stevia trays from the freeze dryer were finished and crunchy. So I decided to package them up, and I am putting them in quart-sized jars so that I can use them. I'm not going to put them in long-term storage because I'm hoping to make those stevia drops. I was able to fit 2 trays of stevia in 1 quart jar by pushing it down with that plunger. It worked really well. And then I sealed it up using this rechargeable handheld vacuum sealer and the regular mouth attachment there. I'm pleased with this device, and you can find out more about it in our Amazon shop. I got 2 quart jars of stevia, and that was wonderful. On day 8, we got several things done. We took these purple beans and steam blanched them and put them in the freeze dryer. See, they turn green when you steam blanch them. I also shredded up some zucchini. We put in there some whole okra, and I also sliced up lots of jalapenos into rings to put those through the freeze dryer, maybe for pizzas and stuff like that. That was fun. And you can see all of the food here on the trays waiting to go into the freeze dryer. I also put some ají peppers in there like last week. That day I also had lots of ají peppers left, so I decided to turn them into a pepper sauce, kind of like Tabasco sauce. In this recipe, you weigh out the peppers to determine how much vinegar you put in it, and so I just have like a kitchen scale that you use. It's very affordable from Amazon. I did cut the stems off of these peppers and cut them in half. I did end up taking out all of the seeds rather than putting them all in the pepper sauce. And I ended up saving a lot of those seeds. For this recipe, I love to use white wine vinegar, and I buy it in bulk from Azure. And with the 8.5 ounces of peppers, it would then call for 1.5 cups of vinegar. I put that in a sauce pot and added the peppers. Stirred it around a little bit, turned it on high until it came to a boil. Then you cover it, turn it down to low so it can simmer for about 20 to 30 minutes until it is soft. And then I poured it right into my Vitamix blender because it does such a good job making a smooth sauce. Just within a couple of seconds, actually, it turned into an amazing sauce. But it did end up a little bit too thick for me, so I added more vinegar just to thin it out a little bit. Put it back through the Vitamix, and in a couple of seconds it was ready to be packaged up. I ended up making about 24 ounces of this ají pepper sauce. And I started by filling an 8-ounce jelly jar with the sauce. And then earlier in the season, I had bought a lot of these reusable ketchup bottles from Walmart for like 50 cents a piece. And so we are using them for different hot pepper sauces that we're making. So I filled up this container. It's 12 ounces. I didn't know ahead of time that it would make about 4 ounces more. So I got out one of our small jars, a 4-ounce jar, and was able to pretty much fill that one as well. Now, the reusable ketchup bottle full of pepper sauce will stay in our refrigerator for us, but our son-in-law Gavin loves hot sauce too, so these other jars are probably going to go to him, and I think he will enjoy them as well. That day also, the chicken broth was ready to be strained. And in these situations when I make small batches of chicken broth, I store them and freeze them in these freezer containers. When I make broth in my crock pot, it only ends up making about 2 quarts of broth, and it doesn't make sense for me to get out my pressure canner for 2 quarts. So this batch made a 1-cup freezer container, 2 pint-sized freezer containers, and a quart-size freezer container, and we will really enjoy these. And I like it now that I can share some of my broth with my daughter who's married and her husband. Just kind of makes me feel good. Day 9 of the challenge was tomato day. I did a little bit of harvesting of these absolutely beautiful tomatoes, but I also had quite a few tomatoes in the refrigerator. Yes, I know you're not supposed to put tomatoes in the refrigerator, but in my opinion, putting them in the refrigerator is better than keeping them on your counter to rot because you just don't have time that day to process and preserve all of these tomatoes. So that's what I did, put them in the refrigerator. I decided to use the paste tomatoes to make pasta sauce, and the slicing tomatoes I decided to make crushed tomatoes, and I'm canning both of those. Now I started with the paste tomatoes. I started out by coring them, and putting them in my Nesco roaster to start cooking down. I start with just a few on the bottom and turn my Nesco onto 250 degrees just to get it started and so that the tomatoes don't scorch in there. I also put my Juliet cherry tomatoes in there because they're not super juicy. They're almost like a mini Roma tomato and they do really well in a sauce. Then when I had them all done, I moved on to the slicing tomatoes and I decided to core them and skin them so that I could use them to make crushed tomatoes. I'm gonna put them in boiling water just for about 30 seconds or less until the tomato skins start to split. And then I will move them into a cold water bath until they're cold enough to handle, and then I can skin them and the skins come off really easily. You're seeing my Nesco roaster completely full of tomatoes. I ran out of paste tomatoes before it was all filled up, so I substituted some slicing tomatoes on top to fill it up. And right here I am showing you my very favorite trick of how to make pasta sauce or tomato sauce a lot faster by removing a lot of the tomato water. And basically, if you cook these tomatoes and don't agitate them at all, the water will separate and you can spoon it off and you can get to the point very quickly where there's very little water left with your tomato pulp. My crushed tomatoes are now in a giant pot also, and I am bringing them to a boil, and then we'll let them simmer for about 20 to 30 minutes to soften before I can them. And they are ready to be canned. I do add citric acid and salt to each jar. I've got everything set up here that I need so that I can start the canning process. I'm using this book, my favorite canning book, and the recipe for crushed tomatoes. And I will be using a pressure canner to can these crushed tomatoes. So let's get started canning. I am just going to fill these jars up, leaving 1 inch of head space. I'm going to swirl around a chopstick in there to get any of the bubbles out. Measure, make sure I have 1 inch of head space. Wipe off the rim of the jar. Put on a new clean canning lid and a ring. And then they just go right into the pressure canner. I'm going to do the same with all the rest of the jars until all the tomatoes are filled in the jars. And I'm adding just a tiny bit of vinegar to the water to make the jars stay clean. The tomato pulp for my sauce is looking fantastic. There's not much liquid left in them at all. And so now it's time for me to blend them up. I use a Vitamix blender because it does such a great job since I have left all the skins and the seeds. It is not an approved canning procedure to blend in your seeds and your skins. It's not approved by the canning rule makers. But I do it and a lot of other people do it, and it works out fine for me. So then I pour all of the sauce into a pot and get that heated up to a boiling. I also add citric acid and salt to these jars as well. And because I'm making pasta sauce, I'm going to be adding an Italian seasoning mix, which is 1/3 oregano, 1/3 thyme, and 1/3 basil. Getting started canning here, again, we're going to be leaving 1 inch of head space at the top of our jars. Swirl out any bubbles that might be in there. Wipe off the rim. Put on a new clean canning lid and the ring. And then put them also into a different pressure canner. In the meantime, the crushed tomatoes are finished and they can come out of the pressure canner. They are just beautiful. This batch ended up making 18 pint jars of crushed tomatoes, which is fantastic. The pasta sauce was finished later on in the evening, but I was so tired I didn't film it. But trust me, there were 10 jars of pasta sauce. Day 10 was fun. I harvested some of these absolutely beautiful passion flowers. Passion flowers will then turn into passion fruit, and that grows wild here. It is native. And the flowers themselves are a little medicinal. They kind of have a calming effect when you steep them with a tea. So I decided it would be wonderful to freeze dry some of them so that I have some preserved for the future when I want to make tea and maybe relax a little bit before bedtime. I also decided to cut back my giant rosemary bush because I don't have any rosemary preserved in the house. And my tarragon bush was also completely out of control. I don't have any of that in the house either, so I cut that back quite a bit and brought it into the house. The rosemary, I picked off all of the leaves and put them on a freeze dryer tray. It actually ended up making 2 trays worth of rosemary. And look at that, look at all that tarragon, like a giant bush that came into the house. And I'm also just taking off all of the leaves of the tarragon and filling up the tray. It actually also made 2 trays to go into the freeze dryer. Well, that's it. That's everything that I got preserved throughout the entire second week of the challenge. I'm pretty proud of myself to have all of those things stored up for winter or for the next year or however long it takes us to use all of those things. I encourage you all to just jump into the challenge if you haven't already. Doesn't matter that 2 weeks have gone by, jump in and start preserving something. Also, I would love for you to go check out Jessica from Three Rivers Homestead on YouTube and on Instagram. She is a great lady and her homestead is great to follow. Hey, if you're enjoying videos like this, make sure that you subscribe while you're here, and also remember that the best way that you can help us here on the homestead is just to share our videos on your social media. Until next time, thank you so much for stopping by our homestead. Take care and God bless.